Some men are loud. They scream to let the world know they are dangerous. Other men don't make a sound. They sit in the back of a greasy roadside diner, feeding pancakes to a 6-year-old girl, measuring the distance to the exits out of pure, unbreakable habit. When an entitled punk decided to kick the quiet man's chair, he expected fear. He didn't notice the faded ink on the father's forearm. He didn't know he just kicked a ghost. The rain outside was relentless, turning the interstate into a slick, black mirror reflecting the harsh neon sign of Rusty's Diner. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of scorched coffee, damp wool, and ancient fryer grease. It was the kind of place people ended up in, rather than chose to go. Audrey Mercer sat in the furthest corner booth, nursing a ceramic mug of something that tasted vaguely like battery acid. 34 years old, wearing a tailored charcoal trench coat that cost more than the diner's annual lease, she didn't belong here. Her Maybach was idling out in the parking lot, the driver scrolling through his phone, waiting for the weather front to clear so her grounded private jet could get clearance. Audrey had wanted out of the leather seats. She had spent the last 48 hours locked in boardrooms, dismantling a rival logistics firm, listening to men in silk ties lie through their teeth. She came into the diner wanting to see real people. Instead, she just felt tired. She was a billionaire in a room full of people counting quarters, and the sheer disparity of it all left a cynical, metallic taste in her mouth. The bells above the front door jingled. A rush of cold air cut through the stagnant warmth of the room. A man walked in, holding the hand of a little girl. Audrey watched them over the rim of her mug. The man was in his late 30s. His jaw was covered in a rough, uneven scruff, and his olive-drab field jacket was dark with rain at the shoulders. He looked exhausted. The deep lines around his eyes spoke of chronic sleeplessness, the kind that didn't go away with a single good night's rest. But it was the way he moved that caught Audrey's attention. He didn't just walk in. He processed the room. In the space of 3 seconds, his eyes tracked the counter, the kitchen doors, the 2 truckers by the window, and finally, Audrey in the back. His gaze swept over her. Clinical, detached, entirely uninterested in her wealth or her face, before settling on a booth facing the main entrance. Only then did his shoulders drop a fraction of an inch. The little girl beside him was entirely different. She wore a bright yellow raincoat that swallowed her small frame, and she was practically vibrating with excitement. "Can I get strawberry syrup, Dad? You promised. You said if I was good at the dentist." Her voice was high, ringing clearly over the low hum of the diner's refrigerators. "I did say that, didn't I, Lily?" the man replied. His voice was a low, gravelly baritone. It softened the edges of his hardened face. "We'll see what they've got." They sat at a booth 2 down from Audrey. The waitress, an older woman with a name tag that read Brenda, walked over with 2 menus and a damp rag. She wiped the table down, leaving streaks of moisture. "What can I get you, hon?" Brenda asked, looking at the little girl. "Pancakes with strawberries. And butter, a lot of butter," Lily demanded, kicking her small legs under the table. "Jack," Audrey heard the waitress call him that when she asked if he wanted his usual coffee, pulled a worn, brown leather wallet from his back pocket. Audrey had built an empire by reading the details people tried to hide. She watched his thumb slide into the cash compartment. It was flat. He pulled out a crumpled $5 bill and 3 ones. He smoothed them out on his thigh, out of his daughter's sight. "Just the pancake platter for her, Brenda," Jack said, closing the wallet. "Extra strawberries, and a black coffee for me." "You not eating, Dad?" Lily asked, looking up, her brow furrowing. "Ate a big lunch at work, I'm stuffed." He smiled at her. It was a practiced smile, tight at the corners. Audrey felt a strange pang in her chest. It wasn't pity. Pity was cheap. It was respect. She spent her days surrounded by men who inflated their worth, who threw millions around to mask their insecurities. Here was a man doing complex math over $8 to make sure his kid got a decent meal, swallowing his own hunger without a second thought. Jack leaned back against the vinyl seat, keeping his hands above the table. His jacket sleeves pulled back slightly. Audrey noticed a pale scar running along his wrist, disappearing under the fabric. The diner settled back into its quiet rhythm. The rain drummed against the glass. Lily colored on a paper placemat with a stubby red crayon, and Jack watched her, his eyes warm, his posture entirely relaxed. Yet, underneath that relaxation, Audrey sensed a coiled spring. It was the same energy she saw in the high-end private security contractors she employed to guard her international supply chains. The quiet ones were always the ones you had to watch out for. Then, the bells on the door jingled again, and the quiet shattered. They came in like a localized weather event, 4 of them, college-aged or just out of it, wearing expensive puffer jackets and backwards baseball caps. They smelled of damp clothes, cheap body spray, and the unmistakable arrogance of a long night of drinking. The leader, a thick-necked guy with a trust fund haircut, laughed too loudly at a joke one of his friends made. He kicked the door shut behind him, rattling the glass in its frame. "Man, this place is a dump," he announced to the room, not caring who heard him. Audrey gripped her coffee mug. She recognized the type. She crushed men like him in negotiations every Tuesday. They were loud, fragile, and utterly convinced of their own importance. "Let's call him Trent," she thought. He looked like a Trent. Trent and his crew swaggered past the front counter, ignoring Brenda's polite greeting. They wanted a booth. Specifically, they wanted the booth next to Jack and Lily, right by the main floor heater. The problem was, 4 large guys in bulky jackets didn't fit neatly into the small space. They spilled over into the aisle. Trent took the seat directly behind Jack. He threw himself into the vinyl with enough force to rock the connected booths. Jack's coffee spilled slightly over the rim of his mug. Jack didn't turn around. He just reached out, grabbed a napkin, and wiped the spill. He didn't say a word. "Yo, get us some menus," Trent yelled toward the counter, snapping his fingers. Audrey felt her jaw clench. She hated rudeness. She considered signaling her driver to come in and clear the trash out, but she held back. She was curious. She looked at Jack. Jack was staring at Lily. "Color inside the lines, Peanut. You're doing great." His voice was perfectly even. He was actively choosing to ignore the noise. One of Trent's friends, sitting across from him, leaned over the aisle. His elbow knocked violently into the edge of Jack's table. Lily's water glass wobbled, tipped, and began to fall. Before gravity could pull the water down onto Lily's yellow coat, Jack's hand shot out. It was a blur of motion. He caught the heavy glass mid-air, righted it, and set it down softly on the table. Not a single drop hit the little girl. Audrey blinked. She hadn't even seen him shift his weight. Jack finally turned his head. He looked over his shoulder at the kid who bumped the table. "Watch your space." It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact, delivered flatly. The kid blinked, a little taken aback by the dead-eyed stare. But Trent leaned forward, smelling an opportunity to show off for his audience. "Or what, buddy?" Trent sneered, looking Jack up and down. He took in the cheap coat, the scruff, the tired eyes. He saw a blue-collar nobody, a stepping stone for his own ego. "My boy bumped the table. Relax. Maybe don't bring your kid to a dump if you don't want her getting dirty." Lily stopped coloring. She looked up at Trent, her wide eyes reflecting a sudden fear. She shrunk back into the vinyl seat. Jack noticed the shift in his daughter immediately. The atmosphere around the table changed. The protective, soft aura of the father vanished, replaced by something cold and dense. Audrey felt the temperature in the room drop. Jack didn't raise his voice. He didn't puff out his chest. He turned his body slightly so he was shielding Lily from their view. "Keep your voices down," Jack said, "and keep out of our space." Trent laughed, a harsh, braying sound. He looked at his friends, grinning. "Check this guy out. Giving orders? What are you, a cop? You look like you sweep floors." "Hey, man, leave it," one of Trent's friends muttered, suddenly uneasy. He lacked Trent's liquid courage and possessed basic survival instincts. He had noticed what Audrey noticed, the complete absence of fear in Jack's eyes. "Nah, screw that," Trent said, leaning heavily against the back of Jack's booth, pushing the vinyl into Jack's spine. "We're cold. We want this whole corner. The heater's right there. Why don't you and the brat move to the counter?" Audrey slowly placed her mug on the table. She slid her phone out of her pocket, ready to dial her security detail. She knew exactly where this was going. "We are eating here," Jack said. The gravel in his voice had smoothed out into a flat, dangerous blade. "Turn around. Eat your food. Do not talk to me again." "Are you deaf?" Trent snapped, his face flushing with sudden anger. He hated being dismissed. "I said, move." To punctuate his demand, Trent stood up, stepping into the aisle. He stood over Jack's table. Lily whimpered, hiding her face against Jack's arm. Jack looked down at his daughter. He gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Close your eyes, Peanut," Jack whispered softly. "Dad? We're going to play the counting game. Close your eyes, cover your ears, and count to 10. Nice and slow, okay?" Lily nodded, trusting him completely. She squeezed her eyes shut and clamped her small hands over her ears. 1, 2, she whispered. Jack stood up. Jack didn't just stand. He unfolded. He wasn't exceptionally tall, maybe 6 foot even, but the physical presence of the man expanded to fill the aisle. He stepped away from the table, drawing Trent's focus entirely onto himself, ensuring Lily was out of the direct line of fire. "I asked you politely," Jack said. Trent smirked, mistaking Jack's calm demeanor for hesitation. "You didn't ask me anything, old man. Trent drew back his heavy, steel-toed winter boot and kicked the leg of Jack's chair, intending to kick Jack's shin to make him stumble back. He never made contact. Audrey couldn't process the sequence of events as distinct actions. They flowed together in a brutal, horrifyingly efficient blur. As Trent's leg came up, Jack shifted slightly. He didn't block the kick. He let it pass cleanly by his hip. In the same breath, Jack's left hand snapped forward, locking onto the collar of Trent's expensive puffer jacket. His right hand drove forward in a short, piston-like strike. Crack. The sound of Jack's open palm striking Trent's solar plexus echoed through the diner like a gunshot. All the air left Trent's lungs in a wet gasp. His eyes bulged. Before Trent could even register the pain, Jack twisted his hips, dragging Trent forward by the jacket, and swept Trent's remaining planted leg. Trent hit the linoleum floor with a sickening thud. The back of his skull bounced off the ground. He lay there, paralyzed, gasping uselessly like a fish on a dock. The diner froze. Brenda paused behind the counter, a coffee pot hovering in her hand. The 2 truckers by the window stood up, eyes wide. 4, 5. Lily's muffled, innocent voice drifted from the booth. Trent's friends broke from their shock. 2 of them surged out of the booth, shouting. Jack didn't adopt a fighting stance. He just pivoted. The first friend threw a wild, looping haymaker. Jack deflected it lazily with his left forearm, stepped inside the boy's guard, and drove an elbow upward. It connected perfectly beneath the kid's chin. The boy's head snapped back, and his legs turned to jelly. He collapsed into the adjacent table, scattering salt and pepper shakers. The third friend hesitated, seeing his 2 buddies dismantled in less than 3 seconds. He reached out, trying to grab Jack's coat. Jack caught the boy's wrist. He didn't punch him. He twisted the arm, stepping through and applying leverage to the joint. As Jack rotated, the sleeve of his faded green jacket pulled all the way back to his elbow. Under the harsh fluorescent lights of the diner, Audrey saw it. It was a small tattoo on the inside of his forearm, faded out with time but unmistakable. A golden dagger piercing a specialized delta triangle, backed by a subtly colored sword. Audrey felt the breath catch in her throat. She handled defense contracts. She vetted private military companies. She knew what that ink meant. It wasn't standard military. It wasn't even standard special forces. It was 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta. The unit, the Phantom Tier. You didn't get that tattoo unless you had survived places the government officially denied existed. Jack applied a fraction more pressure to the joint. The third boy screamed in agony, falling to his knees. "Are you done?" Jack asked. His breathing hadn't changed. He wasn't sweating. He looked like he was asking the time. Yes. God, let go, you're breaking it," the boy sobbed. Jack released the wrist. He stepped back, giving the bodies on the floor a wide berth. He adjusted his jacket, pulling the sleeve down to cover the faded ink. He turned back to the booth. He sat down just as Lily opened her eyes. 9, 10, I'm done, Dad." Lily uncovered her ears and smiled. Jack smiled back. The coldness vanished, replaced instantly by the warm, tired father. "Good job, Peanut." Lily looked down at the floor, seeing Trent and his friends groaning on the tiles. Her eyes widened. "Dad, what happened to those men? Did they fall?" "Yeah, honey," Jack said softly, handing her the red crayon back. "Floors are real slippery in here. You gotta be careful." "Oh, my Lord," Brenda gasped, fumbling for the phone behind the counter. "I'm calling the police." Audrey stood up. She moved with purpose, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. She slid into the aisle, stepping right over Trent, who was still trying to remember how to breathe. "Put the phone down, Brenda," Audrey said. Her voice was pure authority. It was the voice that commanded boardrooms and dictated terms to foreign governments. Brenda froze, the receiver halfway to her ear. "Ma'am, there's been a fight." "There was no fight," Audrey corrected smoothly, reaching into her trench coat. She pulled out a sleek leather card holder. She walked to the counter and placed 3 crisp, uncirculated $100 bills next to the register. "These young men had too much to drink. They stumbled, fell over each other, and caused a disturbance. Isn't that right?" Audrey turned and looked down at the boy clutching his arm on the floor. Her eyes were devoid of sympathy. "Isn't that right?" she repeated, her tone dropping in temperature. The boy looked at the terrifyingly calm man in the booth, then at the wealthy woman glaring at him. He nodded frantically. "Yeah, we fell. We're leaving. We're leaving right now." Audrey turned to Jack. He was watching her. His eyes were scanning her, analyzing the threat level she presented. He noticed the tailoring of her coat, the confident posture, the way she controlled the room with her voice. "Your coffee's cold," Audrey said to him, her voice softening just a fraction. Jack looked at the spilled mug. "I've had worse." Audrey reached into her coat and pulled out a heavy stock business card, pure matte black with embossed silver lettering. She set it on the table next to Lily's water glass. "My name is Audrey Mercer. I own a company that values people who know how to keep their space clear." She looked deliberately at his right sleeve. "You're wasting your time sweeping floors, Mr. Hayes," Jack said quietly. "Jack Hayes. Well, Jack Hayes, buy your daughter the pancakes. If you want to stop counting quarters, call that number." Audrey turned on her heel and walked out of the diner, the bells jingling behind her. As she stepped into the freezing rain and toward her waiting Maybach, she couldn't help but smile. For the first time all week, she had found an equation that actually made sense. The drive back to their apartment was quiet. The rain had slowed to a miserable drizzle, the wipers of Jack's 15-year-old Ford truck scraping a harsh, arrhythmic beat against the windshield. Lily was asleep in the passenger seat, her head resting against the cold glass, the yellow raincoat still wrapped around her like a protective shell. Jack drove with his left hand. His right hand rested on his thigh, the knuckles aching slightly. It wasn't a sharp pain, just a dull throb, a reminder of the sudden, violent release of kinetic energy. He hated that feeling. He hated how easily the violence woke up inside him. It was a dog sleeping under the porch. You could ignore it for years, but the second someone rattled the gate, it was at the fence, teeth bared. He pulled into the parking lot of their low-rise complex. The streetlights flickered, casting a sickly orange glow over the cracked asphalt. Jack turned off the engine and sat in the dark for a long moment. He listened to the ticking of the cooling block. He watched a stray cat dart under a rusted dumpster. He breathed. Taking Lily inside was a routine he had perfected. He scooped her up without waking her, cradling her head against his shoulder. He locked the truck, walked up the concrete stairs to the second floor, and unlocked door 2B. Inside, the apartment smelled of stale air and cheap laundry detergent. It was clean, meticulously, obsessively clean, but bare. There were no pictures on the walls, no rugs to soften the worn linoleum. The only color in the living room came from Lily's plastic toy bin in the corner. Jack laid her down in her twin bed, pulled the blankets up to her chin, and carefully untied her small sneakers. He stood in the doorway of her room for 5 minutes, just watching her chest rise and fall. This was the only time his heart rate ever truly settled. When he finally stepped into the kitchen, the reality of his life was waiting for him on the small Formica table. A stack of envelopes. Most of them had red warning stamps. Final notice. Past due. He walked to the sink, turned on the cold tap, and splashed water on his face. He grabbed a ragged towel and dried off, staring at his reflection in the dark window above the sink. The eyes looking back at him were ancient. They had seen the sun rise over the Coincidental Valley. They had watched good men bleed out in the dust of places that didn't exist on any map. Now, they were staring at a final notice from the electric company. His wife, Sarah, had died 3 years ago. Ovarian cancer. It had been fast, but not fast enough to spare her the pain, and certainly not fast enough to spare their bank account. The military insurance had covered a fraction of the experimental treatments. Jack had paid the rest out of pocket, liquidating his pension, selling the house, draining everything they had built. He didn't regret a single cent of it. He would have burned the world down to buy her 1 more week. But the fire had eventually gone out, leaving him alone in the ashes with a 3-year-old girl and a mountain of debt. Civilian life had no use for a man whose primary skill set was surviving catastrophic violence. He had applied for security jobs, but standard PMC work required long deployments overseas. He couldn't leave Lily. Standard corporate security required a college degree and a tolerance for bureaucratic nonsense he simply didn't possess. So he unloaded freight trucks at a distribution warehouse on the graveyard shift. It paid just enough to keep the lights on, provided they didn't use too much electricity. Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out his keys, his meager wad of cash, and the black business card. Audrey Mercer. He turned the card over in his fingers. The cardstock was incredibly heavy. It felt like holding a piece of solid slate. There was no job title, just her name, a phone number, and an email address. He knew women like her. He had escorted politicians and defense contractors through war zones. They looked at men like him as tools, hammers to swing at problems they didn't want to get their own hands dirty solving. The moment the hammer got chipped, they threw it in the trash and bought a new one. He didn't want to be a tool anymore. He just wanted to be a father. Jack opened the junk drawer beneath the counter, tossed the black cart inside next to a tangle of dead batteries and a broken flashlight, and slammed it shut. He looked at the clock. It was 10:30 p.m. His shift started at midnight. He went to the closet, pulled out his heavy work boots, and began to lace them up. He had 90 minutes to sleep. He set his internal alarm, lay down on the faded sofa, and closed his eyes. The dog went back to sleep under the porch. Thursday was the day the math finally broke. It started with the cold. A bitter, unseasonal freeze had rolled in off the lakes, dropping the temperature by 20 degrees in a single afternoon. Jack was at the warehouse, standing on a concrete loading dock that offered zero protection from the wind. He spent 8 hours dragging wooden pallets of industrial engine parts using a manual jack. His lower back felt like it was packed with crushed glass, and his hands, despite the heavy leather gloves, were completely numb. His foreman, a perpetually angry man named Harris, who wore a clipboard like a badge of authority, walked up to Jack just as his shift was ending. "Hayes, you're short on your quota," Harris said, not looking up from his paperwork. Jack stopped pulling the pallet. He wiped the freezing sweat from his forehead. "I moved 40 pallets tonight, Harris. Quota is 35. Forklift broke on lane 4. Those guys couldn't hit their numbers. We take the warehouse average. Average is under." Harris finally looked up, his eyes flat and uncompromising. "I'm docking you 3 hours. Company policy on missed production." Jack stared at him. The injustice of it didn't spark anger. It sparked a cold, terrifying panic. 3 hours of pay was $54. $54 was the exact amount he needed to cover the copay for Lily's asthma medication, which she was running dangerously low on. "You can't do that," Jack said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I did my work. I can do whatever I want, Hayes. You don't like it? The door's right there. I got 10 guys waiting in the parking lot who will do your job for $2 less an hour. Clock out." Jack looked at Harris's throat. He calculated the exact amount of pressure required to crush the man's windpipe. It would take less than 4 seconds. It would be effortless. The violent urge was a sudden, blinding flash, hot and bright. Jack closed his eyes, swallowed the bile in his throat, and stepped back. He clocked out. The real disaster hit an hour later. Jack was driving to pick Lily up from Mrs. Higgins, an elderly neighbor who watched her during his shifts. He was stopped at a red light on 4th Street when the truck shuddered violently. A loud, metallic clanking echoed from under the hood, followed by a thick hiss of white steam. The engine died. Jack turned the key. Nothing. Just a hollow click. He got out, popped the hood, and waved away the acrid smoke. The serpentine belt had snapped, whipping around and cracking the radiator housing. Coolant was bleeding out onto the asphalt in a bright green puddle. It was a fatal wound. A tow truck would be $150. The radiator and belt, even if he installed them himself, would be another $300. He had $22 in his checking account. Jack stood in the freezing rain, staring at the smoking engine. The city moved around him, cars honking, people rushing to warm offices and hot coffee. He felt entirely invisible. He had survived IEDs in the Helmand province. He had survived ambushes in the dead of night, but he was being defeated by a broken piece of rubber and a plastic tank. He slammed the hood shut with enough force to dent the metal. He walked the remaining 2 miles to Mrs. Higgins' apartment. The cold soaked through his boots, but he didn't feel it. He felt the heavy, crushing weight of failure. He was failing his daughter. He was trying to play by the rules of a world that didn't care if he starved. When he finally walked into his own apartment with Lily, she was complaining about a tight chest. The cold air had aggravated her lungs. Jack gave her a dose from her inhaler, checking the counter on the back, so 4 puffs remaining. He put her to bed, read her a story until her breathing steadied, and then walked into the kitchen. He didn't look at the stack of bills. He didn't look out the window. He walked straight to the junk drawer. He opened it. The black card was resting exactly where he had thrown it, half buried under a tangle of cables. Jack picked it up. He felt the weight of it again. Pride was a luxury for men who didn't have daughters struggling to breathe. Pride didn't pay for tow trucks. Pride didn't buy inhalers. Jack picked up his cheap prepaid cell phone and dialed the number. It rang twice. A woman answered. Her voice was polished, professional, and entirely devoid of warmth. Mercer Holdings, Executive Office. Audrey Mercer, Jack said. I'm sorry, Ms. Mercer does not take unsolicited calls. If you'd like to leave a— Tell her it's Jack Hayes, he interrupted. Tell her my space is clear. There was a pause on the line. The typing in the background stopped. Hold, please. Jack waited. He looked at the cracked linoleum floor. 10 seconds passed. Then 20. A new voice came on the line. It was crisp, authoritative, and immediately recognizable. I assumed you'd throw the card away, Mr. Hayes, Audrey said. There was a hint of amusement in her tone. I did, Jack replied. I fished it out. Are you done counting quarters? I need a job, but I'm not a bodyguard. I don't carry umbrellas, and I don't open car doors. If I wanted a doorman, I'd hire one, Audrey said sharply. I have a structural problem. I need someone who understands how things break. Can you be at my office in an hour? My truck is dead. I'll need to take the bus. Make it an hour and a half. Text me your address. A car will be there in 20 minutes. She hung up. Jack lowered the phone. He walked into his bedroom, opened his small closet, and pulled out his only suit. It was a dark navy two-piece he had bought for Sarah's funeral. It didn't fit perfectly anymore. He had lost weight since then, but it was clean. He tied the dark tie, splashed water on his face, and waited by the window. Exactly 20 minutes later, a black Lincoln Navigator idled to a stop at the curb. Jack walked out the door. The dog was finally off the leash. Mercer Holdings occupied the top 15 floors of a glass and steel needle in the center of the financial district. It was a monument to invisible power. They didn't make consumer goods. They moved them. They controlled the arteries of global trade, shipping lanes, rail networks, freight logistics. Jack stepped out of the elevator onto the 70th floor. The doors parted with a soft chime, revealing a sprawling reception area built of white marble, brushed steel, and frosted glass. It was designed to intimidate. It was designed to make visitors feel small, to remind them of the wealth and influence concentrated in this single room. Jack didn't feel small. He felt like he was walking into a Target building. His eyes began their involuntary mechanical sweep. Receptionist desk, reinforced base, likely ballistic glass under the veneer, 2 security cameras in the ceiling corners, overlapping fields of fire, blind spot near the water feature. The man in the gray suit pretending to read a tablet on the sofa is armed, slight bulge on his right hip, sitting with his back to the wall, eyes tracking the elevator bank. Jack walked to the desk. Jack Hayes, here to see Audrey Mercer. The receptionist, a young man with a flawless haircut, blinked. He looked at Jack's slightly faded suit and scuffed boots. He clearly didn't fit the profile of the executives who usually stepped off that elevator. Ah, yes. Mr. Hayes, Miss Mercer is expecting you. Through those glass doors, take a left. Conference room A. Jack bypassed the armed man in the gray suit without looking at him. He walked down a wide corridor lined with abstract art. He reached conference room A. The walls were floor-to-ceiling smart glass, currently frosted opaque. Jack didn't knock. He pushed the heavy door open and stepped inside. The room was vast. A massive mahogany table dominated the center. 6 people were seated around it. 5 of them were men in bespoke suits, looking at projected quarterly earnings on a screen. The 6th was Audrey Mercer. She was sitting at the head of the table, wearing a stark white blouse and a razor-sharp blazer. She looked up as Jack entered. The exhaustion Jack had seen in the diner was gone, replaced by a terrifying, focused intensity. The man speaking at the front of the room, a slick, silver-haired executive with an aggressive tan, frowned. "Excuse me," the executive barked. "We are in the middle of a closed-door briefing. You need to leave." Jack ignored him. He looked at Audrey. Audrey raised a hand, silencing the executive. "It's fine, Richard. Mr. Hayes is here at my invitation. Have a seat, Jack." Richard flushed red. "Audrey, with respect, we are discussing the security breaches at the port of Long Beach. This is highly classified internal data. Who is this guy? One of your new PMC contractors? They usually wear better suits." Several of the other men chuckled softly. Jack didn't sit down. He stood near the door, his hands resting loosely at his sides. He looked at Richard. The chuckle died in the room. There was something profoundly unsettling about the way Jack looked at people. It wasn't anger. It was an absolute lack of hesitation. "Richard," Audrey said, her voice dropping to a dangerous purr. "If you ever comment on a guest's attire in my boardroom again, I will have security escort you out of this building, and your severance package will be tied up in litigation until your grandchildren are in college. Am I understood?" Richard swallowed hard. He looked down at his tablet. "Understood." "Good." Audrey turned to Jack, a faint smirk playing on her lips. "Gentlemen, you are dismissed. Leave the files." The executives scrambled to pack their briefcases. They filed past Jack, giving him a wide berth, their eyes averted. The door clicked shut, leaving Jack and Audrey alone in the massive room. Audrey leaned back in her chair. She studied him. "You look tired, Mr. Hayes." "I've had worse," Jack said, repeating his line from the diner. "I'm sure you have." Audrey picked up a sleek black remote and pressed a button. The frosted glass walls instantly turned clear, revealing a dizzying view of the city skyline. "What do you see when you look at my company, Jack?" "I see a lot of glass," Jack said simply. "I see a receptionist desk with Kevlar paneling, a plainclothes armed guard in the lobby who favors his right leg and wouldn't be able to draw from his seated position in under 2 seconds, and a biometric lock on this door that defaults to open if the primary power grid is severed." Audrey paused. She looked at the door, then back at Jack. The faint smirk was gone. She was entirely serious now. "It took my current security firm 3 weeks and $100,000 to generate a vulnerability report that didn't even mention the door lock," Audrey said quietly. "They rely on technology. Technology fails," Jack said, finally pulling out a chair and sitting down. He didn't lean back. He sat on the edge, perfectly balanced. "Why am I here, Ms. Mercer?" "Audrey," she corrected. She slid a thick manila folder across the mahogany table. It stopped exactly in front of Jack. "I don't need a bodyguard, Jack. I have a dozen guys with earpieces who can stand in front of me. I need someone who can see the things I can't. I need a hunter." Jack didn't open the folder. He looked at it, then at her. "I don't hunt people anymore." "I don't want you to shoot anyone," Audrey said, her tone sharpening. "I move $6 billion of freight a year. In the last 4 months, 3 of my most secure shipments out of the Long Beach terminal have vanished. High-end electronics, pharmaceuticals, aerospace components, no alarms tripped, no camera footage tampered with. The police think it's an inside job. The feds think it's the cartel. My current security chief thinks we need more cameras." "What do you think?" Jack asked. "I think my security chief is an idiot," Audrey said bluntly. "I think someone has found a blind spot in my armor, and they are bleeding me dry. The men in this room? They're politicians. They care about stock prices and quarterly reports. They don't know how to fight in the mud. I saw you in that diner, Jack. You didn't posture, You didn't negotiate. You identified the threat, you neutralized it instantly, and you made sure your daughter didn't see the ugly part. You are ruthlessly efficient. Jack finally reached out and opened the folder. It was filled with manifests, police reports, and blueprints of a sprawling port facility. You want me to find the leak, Jack said. I want you to go to Long Beach. I want you to walk the floor. I want you to look at my operation the exact same way you looked at my lobby. Find the crack. Find the rats. Tell me how to burn them out. Audrey leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. I'll pay you $200,000 for 1 month of consulting work. If you find the leak, I'll double it. Jack looked at the number written on the top page of the contract. $400,000. It was more money than he had made in his entire military career. It was Lily's college fund. It was a new truck. It was a house with a yard. It was breathing room. I have a daughter, Jack said quietly. I don't travel, I don't leave her. I know, Audrey said smoothly. She slid a second piece of paper across the table. It was a glossy brochure for a private preparatory academy. St. Jude's, the best private elementary school in the state. I pulled some strings. She has a spot starting Monday. The tuition is covered. I also have an executive apartment 2 blocks from here. 3 bedrooms. It's yours for the duration of the contract. You work local. You review the Long Beach data from here, you visit the local transit hubs, you fly out only if you absolutely have to, and you take my private jet so you're home before she goes to sleep. Jack stared at the brochure. He saw Lily in the yellow raincoat, counting to 10 while he broke a man's jaw. He saw the empty inhaler on the counter. He saw the final notice from the electric company. He looked up at Audrey Mercer. She wasn't just wealthy, she was tactical. She had anticipated his every objection and dismantled it before he could even vocalize it. You did your homework, Jack said. I don't make investments without knowing the asset, Audrey replied. She held out a silver pen. Are you going to keep unloading trucks, Jack? Or are you going to help me fix my structural problem? Jack looked at the pen. He thought of Harris, the foreman. He thought of the freezing rain. He took the pen. He flipped to the back page of the contract and signed his name in sharp, angular letters. Good, Audrey said, standing up. She didn't offer to shake his hand. She knew better than to offer hollow gestures to a man like him. Your office is on the 68th floor. Access cards are in the folder. Start reading. Jack stood up. He tucked the folder under his arm. Ms. Mercer? She paused at the door. Yes? Your lobby guard, Jack said flatly. Tell him to carry his sidearm on his left hip. He's got a micro tear in his right meniscus. If he tries to draw and pivot on that leg, his knee will buckle, and he'll shoot his own foot. Audrey stared at him for a long, silent moment. A genuine, unguarded smile broke across her face. Welcome to Mercer Holdings, Mr. Hayes. The executive apartment smelled like nothing. That was the first thing Jack noticed. It didn't smell like industrial cleaner or old cooking grease or the damp rot that permeated the walls of his old building. It smelled like filtered, temperature-controlled air. Lily ran through the massive living room, her socks sliding on the pristine hardwood floors. She stopped in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, pressing her small hands against the glass, looking out at the glittering grid of the city night. Dad, the cars look like bugs, she whispered. Jack stood in the kitchen doorway. He had a glass of tap water in his hand. The refrigerator behind him was a stainless steel monolith, pre-stocked by Audrey's assistant with fresh fruit, organic milk, and expensive meats. Yeah, peanut. Nut, they do. Can we stay here forever? Jack looked at his daughter. The dark circles under her eyes, a permanent fixture for the last 3 years, were already starting to fade. She had spent the afternoon at St. Jude's. When he picked her up, she hadn't been coughing. She had been talking a mile a minute about a girl named Chloe who shared her crayons. We'll stay as long as we need to, Jack said softly. He put her to bed in a room that was larger than their entire previous apartment. He tucked her into a bed with sheets that felt like silk. He waited until her breathing slowed into the deep, rhythmic cadence of genuine sleep. Then, he went to work. His office on the 68th floor of Mercer Holdings was a glass box overlooking the financial district. Jack didn't look out the window. He sat at the desk, illuminated only by the glow of a high-resolution monitor and a single brass reading lamp. The security chief's files were a mess of digital noise. Hundreds of hours of security footage, endless logs of employee badge swipes, and overly complex algorithmic analyses of shipping routes. It was exactly how an academic would look for a thief. Jack ignored it all. He didn't look at the cameras. Cameras were easily looped, blinded, or bribed. He looked at the physics. He brought up the customs declarations and the physical weigh station logs for the Long Beach terminal. He started pulling shipping manifests from the 3 specific dates when the high-value cargo had vanished. In the military, when Jack was hunting a high-value target in a hostile city, he didn't look for the man. He looked for the disruption the man caused. He looked for a sudden spike in local food purchases, a change in neighborhood traffic patterns, a sudden silence in local radio chatter. The enemy always left a wake. Thieves were no different. At 3 a.m., Jack found the wake. He stared at a digital manifest for a shipping container marked Aerotech Components. It had cleared the Long Beach terminal gate at 2:14 a.m. on a Tuesday. The digital scale at the gate recorded the gross weight of the truck and the container at 64,200 pounds. It matched the customs declaration perfectly. Jack cross-referenced the truck's transponder data. 3 hours later, that same truck passed a state weigh station on the interstate heading east. The state scale logged the weight at 64,200 pounds. Perfect. Too perfect. Jack pulled up the meteorological data for that specific Tuesday. It had been raining heavily in Long Beach. The truck had driven through a torrential downpour for 3 hours. The canvas tarp covering the secondary payload, the mud accumulating in the wheel wells, the water weight clinging to the steel chassis. It all should have added at least 150 pounds to the interstate weigh-in. But the number was exactly the same. Down to the 0. "You aren't bypassing the scales," Jack whispered to the empty room. "You're spoofing the digital readout." The physical trucks were leaving the terminal completely empty. The high-value goods were being stripped out of the containers inside the port, loaded into localized delivery vans that didn't get weighed at the main commercial gates, and driven right out the front door as standard courier traffic. To make sure the empty semi-truck didn't trigger an alarm when it left, someone was remotely feeding the correct weight data into the terminal's mainframe, overriding the actual physical scale. It was brilliant, it was invisible, and it required administrative access to Mercer Holdings' central logistics server. Jack didn't need to guess who had that kind of access. He ran a query on the server logs, tracking which executive accounts were active during the exact timestamps the weight sensors were spoofed. The system hesitated for a fraction of a second before spitting out a single name. User: R. Sterling Executive. No. R. Sterling wasn't the name. Jack looked closer at the screen. The name was Richard. Richard. The silver-haired executive with the aggressive tan. The man who had mocked Jack's suit in the boardroom. Jack leaned back in the ergonomic leather chair. The cold, mechanical part of his brain began to assemble the pieces. Richard wasn't doing the heavy lifting. He was a suit. He was selling the operational blind spots to a third party, an organized crew on the ground who did the actual stripping and hauling. Jack picked up his phone. He didn't text. He called. Audrey answered on the first ring. Her voice was sharp, instantly awake. "Tell me you have something, Jack." "I have the leak," Jack said. His voice was a flat, calm monotone. "And I have the plumbing." "Who?" "Richard. He's spoofing the gate scales from corporate. The goods never leave the city. They're being transferred to local courier vans inside your terminal." A heavy silence fell over the line. When Audrey spoke, her voice was absolute ice. Richard has been with this company for 12 years. I'll have the FBI at his house in 20 minutes. I'll freeze his assets, seize his passports, and— No, Jack interrupted. Excuse me? If you call the feds, Richard lawyers up. He wipes his private drives. The buyers on the ground scatter, and your cargo is gone forever. You get a white-collar conviction in 3 years, but you don't plug the hole. Then what do you suggest? She asked, the authority in her voice yielding slightly to his tactical certainty. The logistics logs show another shipment of aerospace microchips landing in Long Beach tomorrow night. Richard is on the schedule. He's going to do it again. Jack pulled up a satellite map of the port on his secondary monitor. I don't want Richard. I want the crew he's selling it to. I want to be in the yard when they open the box. Jack, these aren't warehouse workers stealing TVs. The people moving this kind of volume are cartel affiliates. They are armed. If I'm letting you do this, I am sending a tactical team with you. A tactical team makes noise. Noise makes rats run, Jack said. He looked at the satellite image, mapping the shadows, the blind corners, the transit routes. I work alone, Audrey. That was the deal. Audrey breathed out slowly. Do not get killed on my payroll, Mr. Hayes. The paperwork is a nightmare. I'll need a schematic of Sector 4 and a dark-colored company van. The Long Beach terminal at 2 a.m. was a mechanical purgatory. Towering cranes moved like iron dinosaurs against the fog-choked sky, their warning sirens wailing a mournful, automated dirge. The smell of diesel fumes, salt water, and ozone hung thick in the air. Jack sat in the back of a black Mercer Holdings maintenance van, parked between 2 towering stacks of empty shipping containers in Sector 4. The heater was off. The engine was cold. He was wearing dark utility cargo pants, a black soft-shell jacket, and a pair of lightweight tactical boots. He had no sidearm. A gun created complications. A gun escalated a situation from corporate espionage to a federal shootout. Jack was a weapon in his own right. He didn't need steel to make his point. He checked the luminous dial of his watch, 2:12 a.m. Through the rain-slicked windshield, he watched a white, unmarked panel van roll silently down the access lane. It pulled up beside a red 40-foot shipping container resting on a chassis. 4 men got out. Jack analyzed them instantly. They weren't stevedores. They moved with a twitchy, predatory energy. 2 of them carried heavy bolt cutters. The other 2 stood by the van's open doors. One of the men by the van kept his hand inside his jacket. Armed. Subcompact pistol, likely shoulder-holstered based on the elbow flare. Jack slid out of the maintenance van's side door. He didn't let it click shut. He left it open an inch, securing his extraction point. He moved into the shadows of the container stacks. He didn't walk. He flowed. His boots made 0 sound against the wet concrete. He became a piece of the darkness, slipping between the narrow steel canyons. Up ahead, the heavy steel locks of the red container snapped with a loud clack. The doors swung open. "Get it moving," one of the men hissed. "We have an 8-minute window before the roving patrol loops back." The men began hauling small, heavy wooden crates out of the shipping container and tossing them into the back of the panel van. Microchips. Millions of dollars of proprietary tech, vanishing into the night. Jack reached the edge of the container stack, 10 feet behind the armed man guarding the van. He breathed in the damp air. He let his heart rate drop. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, picturing Lily safe in the warm apartment, fast asleep. The dog came out from under the porch. Jack stepped out of the shadows. He closed the 10-foot gap in 2 silent strides. The armed man never heard him. Jack's left hand clamped over the man's mouth, jerking his head back, while his right hand drove a brutal, localized strike into the brachial plexus nerve bundle on the side of the man's neck. The guard's eyes rolled back instantly. His body went limp. Jack caught him before he hit the ground and lowered him silently to the wet concrete. He reached into the man's jacket, pulled out the 9mm Glock, ejected the magazine, cleared the chamber, and tossed the useless slide into the dark. 1 down, 3 left. The man inside the van turned around to grab another crate. He saw Jack standing over his unconscious partner. He opened his mouth to shout. Jack didn't give him the chance. He vaulted into the back of the van. The confined space was a death trap for a brawler, but an absolute playground for a close-quarters specialist. Jack grabbed the heavy wooden crate the man was holding and drove it straight into the thief's chest. Ribs cracked. The man flew backward, slamming his head against the metal wall of the van, sliding down into an unconscious heap. The noise echoed out into the yard. The 2 men by the shipping container froze, dropping the crates they were carrying. They spun around, reaching into their waistbands. Jack leapt out of the back of the van, landing softly on the asphalt. "Drop it," Jack said. His voice wasn't a yell. It was a cold, terrifying promise. The man on the left drew a heavy revolver. Jack moved. He didn't retreat. He advanced into the line of fire. It was a counterintuitive assault tactic drilled into Delta operators. When a weapon is drawn, closing the distance drastically reduces the shooter's reaction time and accuracy. The man fired. The shot went wide, the bullet sparking off a steel container 3 feet to Jack's right. The gunshot sounded like a cannon in the quiet port. Before the man could adjust his aim, Jack was inside his guard. Jack parried the gun hand out, stepping deep into the man's center of gravity, and delivered a devastating palm strike to the chin. The man's jaw dislocated with a sickening pop. He crumpled to the ground, dropping the revolver. The final man panicked. He took one look at his 3 neutralized partners, abandoned his weapon, and sprinted down the access lane toward the main gate. Jack didn't chase him. He didn't need to. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small tactical flashlight, and clicked it on. He walked over to the unconscious man with the dislocated jaw. He knelt down, rolling him onto his back. He pulled a zip tie from his cargo pocket and secured the man's wrists behind his back. He did the same for the other 2. It was over in less than 40 seconds. Jack stood up, brushing a smear of grease off his jacket. He pulled his phone out and hit a single button. "It's done," Jack said into the receiver. "Sector 4, I have the buyers. The cargo is intact." "And the runner?" Audrey's voice came through the speaker. "Let him run. He's going to go back to his bosses and tell them that Mercer Holdings is no longer a soft target. He's going to tell them there's a ghost in the yard." "Stay there. Stay there, I'm coming down." "Audrey, the police!" "I don't care about the police right now, Jack. Secure the perimeter. I am bringing Richard." 20 minutes later, a convoy of black SUVs rolled into Sector 4, their headlights cutting through the fog. Private security contractors piled out, securing the perimeter with military precision. Audrey stepped out of the lead vehicle. She was wearing a tailored wool coat over silk pajamas, completely unfazed by the freezing rain or the industrial grime. Behind her, 2 massive security guards dragged a pale, shaking Richard by his arms. He was wearing an expensive bathrobe and slippers. He looked like a man walking to his own execution. Audrey walked over to Jack. She looked at the 3 bound, groaning men on the asphalt. She looked at the crates of microchips sitting safely in the back of the van. Then she looked at Jack. He wasn't breathing heavily. There wasn't a scratch on him. He was leaning against the side of the shipping container, checking his watch. "You didn't use a gun," Audrey noted, seeing the discarded, dismantled Glock on the ground. "Bullets are a liability," Jack said flatly. Audrey turned her attention to Richard. The executive was trembling violently, staring in horror at the neutralized cartel men. "Richard," Audrey said. Her voice was conversational, which made it infinitely more terrifying. "Do you know what these men would do to you if they found out you let them walk into a trap? Do you know what the people they work for will do to you when they realize you lost them $5 million in inventory? Richard fell to his knees on the wet asphalt. Audrey, please. Please, I can explain. It was just a margin. Shut up! Audrey snapped. Here is what is going to happen. My team is going to turn these three over to the Port Authority Police with an anonymous tip. You are going to go back to the office with my lawyers. You are going to sign over every asset you own to a corporate restitution fund. You are going to give us your offshore account numbers, your passwords, and the names of your contacts. If you hesitate for a single second, I will drop you off in Tijuana with a sign around your neck detailing exactly what you did tonight. Richard sobbed, a pathetic, wet sound. I'll do it. I'll sign it. Just don't let them kill me. Audrey gestured to her guards. Put him in the trunk. The guards dragged the weeping executive away. Audrey turned back to Jack. The hard corporate shell dissolved slightly, revealing the exhausted, fiercely intelligent woman beneath. You found the blind spot, she said quietly. The structural problem is fixed, Jack replied. The locks hold. You just had to take out the trash. I owe you $400,000. Send it to the trust fund I set up. The account details are on the desk in my office. Jack stepped away from the container. I'm going home. Lily wakes up at 7. Audrey watched him walk toward the maintenance van. Jack. He paused, turning his head. What happens when your contract is up next week? She asked. Jack looked at her. He saw the calculation in her eyes. But he also saw something else. Respect. A recognition of a shared, necessary ruthlessness. I guess you'll have to find a new structural problem for me to fix, Jack said. He got in the van, started the engine, and drove out of the yard, leaving the billionaire standing in the rain, surrounded by her reclaimed empire. A month later, the bitter cold of winter had finally broken, yielding to a mild, sunlit afternoon. Jack stood leaning against the wrought iron fence outside St. Jude's Preparatory Academy. He wasn't wearing a faded field jacket anymore. He wore a dark, tailored peacoat and a crisp Oxford shirt. He still carried the quiet, coiled intensity, but the crushing weight of desperation was gone from his eyes. The heavy oak doors of the school opened, and a flood of children in navy blue uniforms poured out into the courtyard. Lily emerged, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. She spotted Jack, her face lighting up with a massive smile. She sprinted across the lawn. Dad? Jack caught her, spinning her around once before setting her down. Hey, Peanut, how was the spelling test? I got 100, she beamed, pulling a crumpled paper with a gold star out of her pocket. And Chloe said her dad is a doctor, but I told her my dad is a ghost who catches bad guys. Jack chuckled, a deep, genuine sound that rumbled in his chest. Let's keep the ghost part between us, okay? A sleek, black Maybach silently rolled to a stop at the curb. The rear window rolled down. Audrey Mercer peered out behind a pair of dark designer sunglasses. Get in, Mr. Hayes. We have a meeting in 20 minutes regarding the new transit hubs in Chicago, Audrey said. Her tone was sharp, but there was a faint, undeniable warmth at the edges. Lily ran up to the window. Hi, Miss Audrey. Audrey pulled down her sunglasses, looking at the little girl. The billionaire CEO, known for breaking men twice her size in negotiations, smiled softly. Hello, Lily. I hear you aced your spelling test. I did. Are we going to the big office, Dad? Yeah, honey, we're going to the office. Jack opened the heavy door of the Maybach and ushered Lily inside. Before he got in, he paused, resting his hand on the roof of the car. He looked down the street, past the manicured lawns and the luxury cars. He didn't see the diner. He didn't see the warehouse. He didn't see the blood or the dirt. He saw a clear path forward. The tattoo on his forearm remained hidden beneath his tailored cuff. The dog under the porch was finally asleep, fed and content. The world was still a dangerous place, filled with arrogant men who didn't know when to keep their space clear. But Jack Hayes wasn't sweeping floors anymore. He was standing at the gates, making sure the monsters never made it inside. He slid into the leather seat and closed the door. The Maybach merged seamlessly into traffic, carrying the ghost and his daughter away into the city. Some men are forced to fight. Others are born to it. But the most dangerous man on earth is the one who fights to protect the innocent soul sleeping down the hall. Jack Hayes walked away from the war, but he never forgot how to be a weapon when the world demanded it. If you loved this story of a quiet hero, reminding entitled bullies that actions have consequences, hit that like button, share it with someone who respects real courage, and subscribe to the channel for more gripping original stories every single week. Stay safe and always watch your space.